Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio. Welcome to part 6 of the Calico Mountain expansion. In this episode, I'll show you how I built and installed this new 30 by 60 inch backdrop behind Calico Mountain. And I'll demonstrate some of my favorite backdrop painting techniques that you can use yourself. I needed a backdrop for Calico that was 30 inches high by 60 inches wide, with supporting legs that reached all the way down to the layout deck. All of the backdrop panels on Thunder Mesa are built in a similar fashion, very much like theatrical flats, with a lightweight frame made from 1x2s that's then surfaced with 1/8 inch thick masonite. The masonite is glued and clamped in place, and then plywood corner cleats are added to the back of the frame to keep everything nice and square. A 1x2 rail was added to the top for additional strength and to match the look of backdrops already on the layout. The backdrop is built and ready to install, and this is where I find out if all the calculations and notes I made are correct and if everything fits the way it's supposed to. Fingers crossed, let's give it a try. The new section was aligned and securely attached to the existing backdrop with drywall screws. Angle braces keep things upright and well supported in this section. And a 1x4 brace, reaching all the way down to the layout frame, was added to support the open end of the new backdrop. Backdrop installed. Now I just have to paint it. Okay, well, I've been going through my paints to make sure that I have the colors on hand that I need to match the existing backdrop, and even doing some color tests here. But I just remembered, before I get too far ahead, I have to prime this panel. So we're going to get a coat of primer on here, white flat primer, before we do any further painting. So that's next. I applied 2 coats of a good white latex primer with a roller and a brush. Note that I also took the precaution of covering all the exposed track with masking tape before painting. Okay, we got 2 good coats of primer on there. I'm gonna let that dry overnight and come back tomorrow, start doing some backdrop painting. Well, this is an exciting day because today I get to paint a backdrop. But before we get started, there's a couple of principles we need to talk about. Basic principles of landscape painting, because when we're painting a backdrop, that's essentially what we're doing. We're making a big landscape painting, but it's mostly just the background and the midground, and the foreground is the modeled scenery. Now, one of the basic tenets of classical landscape painting is you start with the thing that's the farthest away, and then you work towards the things that are closer. And that's exactly how we're going to do this. You start with the farthest away thing, which is the sky, the blue of the sky. Then you go to the next closest thing, which is going to be the clouds. We'll do those. And then the next closest thing, which would be the distant hills and mesas and buttes, and how that will blend the modeled scenery into the backdrop. So, with those principles in mind, let's get started on the blue. The blue of the sky is the first thing we're going to do. Over here on a work table, I've got all of the shades of paint that I'll be working with. Now, when I first did the backdrop for the layout several years ago, I had large quantities of the paints that I would be using a lot mixed up at my local home center. I created the colors with acrylics and painted them on little chips of illustration board, took them down, had them matched. And even though I've had to have them replaced a few times, these are the exact same colors that I started with. So we've got two different shades of blue. We have a darker shade and a somewhat lighter shade. I know they don't look that different to your eye right now, but they do when they're painted on. Over here we have a dark scenery base and a light scenery base. And this one here is specifically for painting shadows in the rocks. But we'll get to that in a little bit later. The first one I want to be using is this darker blue to paint the upper quadrant of the backdrop here. Now, since these are the same colors that I used originally, it should, in theory, make it easier to blend with the existing backdrop to the right there. But we'll see how it goes. I'm going to start up here at the very top. When I did the original backdrop, I painted this top rail a contrasting color, but I actually think I've changed my mind about that, and I'm going to paint it the same blue as the backdrop. It makes a little bit of an abrupt line at the top, and I don't like it as much as I used to, so I'm going to change all this to match. But first, I'm going to do the new part. All right, let's switch out to a bigger roller and do this color to about where this cloud line is. Right about there. Then I'm going to bring in the lighter shade and kind of feather it up into the darker shade of blue while it's still wet. And trust me, yes, that's the tricky part. Okay, now we're going to use our lighter shade of blue in this area down here a little bit closer to the horizon. First pass, I'm just going to roll it on. Take a brush, get just a little bit of water on it. We don't want it soaking wet, just enough to be able to feather that up and blend it. Now, if you're not able to do this, don't worry, this is advanced. If you can, it's great. It adds a great look. If you can't, for your backdrop, just pick a nice medium blue and go with that. But I like the way this looks, so I think it's worth the extra effort. Feather that up just like that. It doesn't have to be perfect. There can be some streaks. Those are just distant clouds. Now be aware that latex and acrylic paints can fool your eye while you're working on them because they dry a shade darker than they go on, just to add to the fun. So if you've got an area that's starting to dry and you go back and, oh, that doesn't match, you might want to just wait, give it a few minutes, and see what it looks like when it's dry. Now I'm going to go in and block in this up here with the brush. Okay, there's really not much to do now except for wait for this to dry to see how well I match the existing color. Well, I've let that dry for a little more than an hour, and the color match looks pretty good to my eye. Might still do a little touch up here and there, but I think I'm going to move on to the next step where I take a pencil and start to just lightly sketch in some of the clouds and other backdrop features I'll be painting next. Now, before we jump into painting clouds on the backdrop, I wanted to take a minute and give you guys a little tutorial on Cloud Painting 101. There's a few things to keep in mind. Clouds come in a lot of different shapes and sizes, obviously, but for the sake of simplicity, we're going to go with the usual cumulus nimbus, or as I like to call them, Andy's room clouds. So I've already prepared a piece of illustration board here with our sky blue color on it. And I'm just going to block in some shapes. I've mixed two different shades here. They're all both kind of blue. You see this? A lot of blue in there. But they're lighter shades of the sky color grayed down just a little bit with just a little teeny bit of black. Not a lot, just a little bit. I got a lighter shade and a more medium shade. And the thing to remember about clouds is there's a couple of things to remember. The closer they are, the bigger they are, obviously. The closer they are, the more of the bottom of the cloud that you see. And the higher they are up in relationship to the higher up they are in relationship to the horizon. The further away they are, the less of the bottom you see, and the closer they are to the horizon. They're lower down in the sky. So with that in mind, I'm going to block in a few clouds here and show you just how I paint clouds. Okay, starting with the darker of the two shades I mixed, I'm going to block in some cloud shapes here. I've got a big one right here. Just making like an oval here. This represents kind of the bottom of the cloud that you can see. And this one is relatively close to us. It's high above the horizon, assuming the horizon is down here. And you can see a lot of the bottom. And now I'm going to make the upper part of the cloud here. What you can do, what I like to do, is kind of put more of the cloud towards one side than the other, and that way you give a indication of the direction of the way the wind's blowing. You see, the brush I'm using, this is called a filbert brush, and it's a synthetic hair brush. They call it synthetic mongoose. I think somebody who was trying to be funny, but it's not flat. It's a flat brush, but it has a rounded shape on the end, which is ideal for making these kind of scalloped little cloud shapes. And I like a brush like this that's not too soft and not too stiff. A hog's bristle brush like you use for oil painting would be too stiff for this, in my opinion. So I'm keeping in mind which way the light is coming from. The sun is up here, just like where the lamp is. And so it's shining down here onto the cloud like this and illuminating the top. Now for clouds that are further away and closer to the horizon, sometimes I just use the darker color and it doesn't look like much on there. But when that dries, it's going to give you the illusion that these are further away and closer to the horizon. Another thing you want to do is create what I call little outriders, which are little bits of cloud that have drifted off, broken away. That also helps give it a feeling of motion and realism. Sometimes I'll put one up here. This one's even closer. You see it's higher up in relationship to the horizon. And it's actually going to cross in front of this one. I like to give, that gives you a nice little illusion, a 3D look. Now, acrylic paints don't give you very much working time. They dry fast. Acrylic and latex paints both dry very fast. But there should be just enough working time, and if you need a little more, you can add a little water, but not too much. Use it sparingly. And you see the kind of brush strokes I'm using. I'm just boom, boom, dab, dab, and pull, and kind of blend together. And now, go back with the pure white. Notice I'm not cleaning my brush in between. I'm just dipping it, and every once in a while I'll give it a little white, but that's about it. Now I can take this white and go up like this and really start to see those highlights come out. You want to leave these little spots of shadow back in here, like that. That gives depth and three-dimensionality to the cloud. Okay, well, I could go back and do a lot more blending on this. I could add a little dark back in here and kind of pull that up, but I think that gives you the basic idea of the principles involved. And if I spend too much time on this, I won't have enough time to paint the backdrop. So let's go do that. Pretty happy with the way that looks. Now I can start on locking in the landforms back here, which form kind of the mid-ground. And you probably remember I showed you I had two different shades of color for the scenery, a darker shade and a lighter shade. And what I've done is I've taken and mixed the two of those together about 50-50 to create a medium shade. It's always a good idea to start in the middle and work your way towards the shadows and the lights. So, got this medium shade and mixed up, and I'm going to use that to start blocking in these cliffs, distant buttes and mesas and things like that. And I'll use this to blend the existing backdrop into the new section over here. Make Calico Mountain look like it's always been there. That's completely dry now. So now I get to go in and start rendering these cliffs. And I'm going to start with the lighter shade of our scenery base color and start to give this a little bit of dimensionality. With that first pass, I just blocked stuff in, but now I'm going to give it a little bit more three-dimensionality. And, well, just have a watch. See how it works. Well, can you guess what's next? That's right. Now we take the darker scenery color and go in and start to block in the shadows.
Next, I added unbleached titanium to my light scenery base and used that to start painting in the highlights. My pre-mixed shadow color was used to deepen some areas of shadow, creating the look of reflected light. Final highlights were added with pure unbleached titanium. And then I mixed up a pale gray-green to paint in some distant trees and shrubs.
Well, I think I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. That's about all the damage I can do on here. Seriously, this is probably the best I can do, and I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. But there's one more little part of the puzzle that I want to install before we call it quits for this week.
I cut another piece of 1/8 inch thick masonite to size and glued it into place for the layout fascia. After the glue dries, I'll back out all the screws and fill the holes with wood putty before painting.
Well, alright, I think that's going to do it for this week. In the next episode of this series, I'm going to be finishing up all of this rock work. And that's going to be something to see. Can't wait. Until then, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Adios for now.